My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask you for pardon of my sins and grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. The Gospel of today's Mass might sound familiar to you. And if it does, it is no surprise because it was the Gospel of the Mass very recently on the 5th of August. And it was the subject of the meditation of that day in 10 Minutes with Jesus. So I'm not going to go into it too deeply, but just to draw our attention to something that you mightn't have noticed about this passage. It's the passage where this woman, this Canaanite woman, or sometimes she's called a Syrophoenician woman. Essentially, she's a pagan woman, not Jewish, not a believer. But she appears in the Gospel because she comes pleading with Jesus. Not just pleading, she starts shouting, in fact, shouting out her prayers for her daughter who is tormented by a devil. She gets no answer initially from Jesus. She obviously goes then to the apostles and begins to pester them, so much so that they go to Jesus and they say to him, give her what she wants because she is shouting after us. In other words, we want to get rid of her, so please grant her petition. And it's then, there's a dialogue which we're not going to go into, but there's a dialogue between this Canaanite woman, great woman really, and Jesus. And it ends up with her receiving what she had wanted in the first place. Jesus says to her at the end, woman, you have great faith. Let your wish be granted. In other words, her daughter is cured of her possession in that moment. Now, what I want to look at in this passage and for us to pray about in this short time of prayer with you, Lord, is the way that people pray in this passage, the way that this Canaanite woman prays, or rather what she prays for, or even better, who she prays for, because she's not praying for herself. She's praying with all her might for her daughter, this poor daughter of hers. So her shouting after Jesus, Sir, Son of David, have pity on me. My daughter's tormented by a devil. So she really prays very intensely. But then the apostles too, for their part, they start praying. They start praying to Jesus. They're asking him for something. And again, well, in some way they're asking for something for themselves because they do want to be rid of this woman. But actually they intercede for her. They intercede on her behalf. And they say to Jesus, give her what she wants because she is shouting after us. Perhaps too their hearts are moved by this poor woman's petition. They are good men. And so that, I'm sure, is part of their petition. If they hadn't interceded for her, well, in principle, she wouldn't have got what she asked for. If she, the mother, the Syrophoenician woman, hadn't interceded for her daughter, well then, again, in principle, her daughter would never have been cured. And that's what I'd like us to look at and to pray about in our brief time of prayer. A time of prayer when we're often thinking of what I need, which is fine, but often I don't think of who should I be interceding for. Lord, who do you want me to be praying for, even now in this 10 minutes of prayer? Is there somebody that is relying on my prayer? Somebody who is, in a sense, like one of my sheep, if we want to put it that way. Jesus, in this passage, he talks about himself being a shepherd. I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Jesus is saying, my primary flock is the house of Israel. They're the ones that I have to look after most of all. But look at this Canaanite woman. She's very clear. She has her flock. Her flock is her family. Her daughter, her possessed daughter, is a wounded lamb. And she will do anything she can to help her poor daughter. The apostles, likewise, in a sense, she has become part of the flock of the apostles because she has approached them and started begging them, intercede for me. You can imagine her saying, you intercede for me with Jesus. So, Lord, you have given me and all of us listening to this 10 Minutes with Jesus, you've given us all a flock to look after. Sometimes very clear for a family man, her mother. Her first flock is her own family. Lord, who is my flock? Who needs my care, my attention, and especially my prayers, my intercessory prayers, which are very pleasing to Jesus? Our Lord does want us to ask for things for ourselves, but he also does ask us to pray for others. There's a young girl, she died at the age of 14 back in 1985. You might have heard of her, Alexia González Barros González, a Spanish girl. She was declared venerable by Pope Francis back in 2017. Please God, we'll see her canonized someday. And I read a book of her life a couple of years ago. And I remember one of the stories there, it was very striking. She had she was in an advanced stage of her cancer. And it was very tough. She really did have a tough time. And because she was clearly very holy, people used to ask her to intercede for them, to pray for them, pray for intentions of theirs. And she would say, well, I'll pray for that. But she went a bit further, and she would write down their names and their intentions on a piece of paper. And she kept this under her pillow in her hospital room. And when the priest would come around to give Holy Communion and she'd receive, she would take out this little piece of paper and she would go through the names and the intentions that she had been asked to pray for. Then her mother one day heard her praying. She was very frank. In other words, she was very kind of outspoken, really. And she had a lot of character, you might say. And she was praying once, and her mother was kind of eavesdropping and could hear what she was saying. And Alexia was praying and very sincerely to Jesus and complaining to him. And she said to Jesus in her prayer, Jesus, when I ask for the intentions of other people, referring to, for example, those intentions on the names under her pillow, she said, when I pray for these intentions, you grant them. Because it appeared that when she prayed for something for these people, she got it. So she said that, and she knew that. She said, when I pray for the intentions of other people, you grant them. But when I pray for myself, and she was praying for her cure, and she wasn't getting it, so she said, when I pray for myself, you don't grant it. When you know something, I don't love you. Now, her mother was shocked when she heard that. And the mother then kind of burst into the room and said, Alexia, you cannot say that. And Alexia, who was only 14 at the time, she said, oh, mother, don't be so silly. Jesus knows I'm not being serious. There was a great kind of ease with Jesus in her prayer. A lovely example for us even now in our prayer. Jesus, the things we should say to you, the things that you want us to say to you, but also the people that you want me to pray for. And that you, like Alexia with her list of intentions, you're relying on my prayer for people. It's very powerful. Sometimes the flock that we have, they're really helpless. And they can do nothing for themselves. And in that way we're especially important to them. Here in Ireland where I live, if you go hill walking, you'll eventually come across a poor sheep. Not every time you go hill walking, but sometimes. You'll eventually come across a sheep who's on their back and they can't turn over, or who's stuck in a ditch. And then you have to be a good Samaritan and lift them out of the ditch or turn them over, because apparently they can never really get back on their feet again. And that's kind of your good deed for the day, once you have turned the sheep over and they go toddling off after that. Well, they're very helpless. And sometimes we have people that we have to pray for. And if maybe nobody else is ever going to pray for them. They're really relying, and then our Lord is relying on our prayer for them. Jesus, let me help me to understand that. You've given me a little flock. You've given me people that you want me to pray for them. They need my prayers. Yesterday we celebrated the great feast of the Assumption of Our Lady into heaven. And we think of Our Lady in heaven, always, 24 hours a day, we could say it that way, She is interceding for her children, you, for me, always interceding. Of course, in her case, like Alexia, anything she asks, she gets. The Church has always said that. She asks for it, she gets it. So let's also go to Our Lady and ask her, help us to be like her, interceding for the little flock that Jesus has given us. I give you thanks, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations you have communicated to me in this meditation. I ask you for help to put them into effect. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.